The divorce papers were getting wet. Jessica didn't notice at first, didn't realize her tears were falling in steady drops onto the crisp legal documents spread across the mahogany table. Around her, the dining room looked like a battlefield after the war had ended. Roses, hundreds of them, deep red and freshly cut that morning, were scattered across the marble floor, their petals crushed and browning. Overturned candles lay in pools of hardened wax. The vintage wine she'd spent 2 weeks tracking down had spilled across the white tablecloth, spreading like a bloodstain. Shattered plates reflected the dim overhead light, their fragments glittering among the ruins of what was supposed to be a perfect night. The smell made her stomach turn. Extinguished candles mixed with the sickly sweet scent of wilting roses and the cold, congealed Korean dishes she'd spent all day preparing. Japchae, galbi, the kimchi jjigae his mother taught her to make before she died. All of it now looked gray and lifeless under the harsh reality of 3 a.m. Jessica's hands trembled as she touched the diamond ring lying next to the papers. It caught the light even in the darkness, winking at her like a cruel joke. She remembered the day he'd slipped it onto her finger with shaking hands, his eyes wet with tears he was too proud to let fall. "You saved me," he'd whispered. "I promise I'll spend my life being worthy of you." That promise felt like a lifetime ago. Her phone lay face down on the table where she dropped it hours earlier, but she could still hear that woman's voice. Sweet, confidence, utterly comfortable answering Kang Dae-Hyun's phone at midnight. "Hello?" the woman had said, slightly breathless, with the casual intimacy of someone who belonged exactly where she was. Jessica hadn't screamed, hadn't demanded to speak to her husband, hadn't even said a word. She'd simply ended the call and stood there in her blue dress, the one he once said made her look like the calm before a storm, and felt something inside her go perfectly, terribly still. For dinner, she'd scattered herself. Not in rage, though God knows she had the right. No, she'd done it with the same methodical precision she used for everything else. She'd swept the candles to the floor, overturned the wine, scattered the roses. Then she'd pulled out the divorce papers she'd kept hidden in her study for 3 weeks. Papers she'd hoped she'd never have to use, despite all the signs she'd ignored. She'd placed them in the center of the table. She'd removed her ring and laid it down like a period at the end of a sentence. And then she'd called for a car and left the only home she'd known for 7 years. Now, sitting in a luxury hotel suite that felt nothing like home, Jessica stared at her bare ring finger. The skin was slightly paler where the band used to sit, a ghost of what she'd been. Outside, Seoul was beginning to wake up. Dawn light crept across the Han River, turning the water gold. Somewhere in this city, Kang Dae-Hyun, the feared Korean mafia boss turned business magnate, the man who could make politicians sweat with a single phone call, the king of an empire built on blood and ambition, was probably still sleeping peacefully next to his mistress. He had no idea what waited for him at home. How does a woman who gave everything become someone who takes it all back? The answer, Jessica was learning, was simple: one deliberate choice at a time. Before we continue with what happens when Dae-Hyun discovers what's waiting for him, I want to hear from you. Drop a like if you're already hooked and subscribe because what comes next is going to shock you. Also, comment below and tell me where you're watching from. I love knowing where my listeners are. And trust me, you won't want to miss what happens when the most powerful man in Seoul realizes he's just lost the only person who ever truly loved him. The revenge that's coming? It's not what you think. 7 years earlier, Jessica hadn't been the polished woman who could navigate boardrooms and speak 3 languages fluently. She'd been a 23-year-old waitress working double shifts at a tiny restaurant tucked behind a bus stop in Itaewon, the kind of place that served cheap comfort food to people who couldn't afford anything else. The restaurant was called Halmeoni's Kitchen, grandmother's kitchen, and it smelled perpetually of soybean paste stew and desperation. Jessica worked there because the owner, Mrs. Park, paid in cash and didn't ask questions about her lack of papers. She was American Korean, had come to Seoul chasing some romanticized dream of connecting with her roots, and had ended up broke and alone in a city that moved too fast for dreamers. But Jessica had something that poverty couldn't take. She noticed people. She noticed the construction worker who always ordered the smallest portion because it was all he could afford. She noticed the college student who pretended to study but was really just sitting in the warmth because her vision was freezing. And she noticed the young man who started appearing every Thursday night, always sitting in the corner booth, always alone. Kang Dae-Hyun. He was 26 but looked older, with the kind of hardness around his eyes that came from seeing too much too young. He wore the same black jacket every week, the collar frayed, the cuffs worn thin. His shoes had holes in them. She could see his socks when he crossed his legs. But he sat with his back straight, his jaw set, watching the other customers eat with an expression that was carefully, deliberately blank. Pride, Jessica recognized. The kind that wouldn't let you beg even when you were starving. He never ordered, just asked for water and sat there for exactly 1 hour before leaving. The first time Jessica slid a full plate of bibimbap in front of him, he looked up at her with such shock that it broke her heart. "I didn't order this," he said, his voice rough from disuse. "I know," Jessica replied in Korean that was accented but clear, "but you look like someone who hasn't smiled in a long time, and nobody should sit in a restaurant for an hour with just water." His hands shook as he picked up the chopsticks. He didn't say thank you. His pride wouldn't let him. But when he finished every grain of rice and stood to leave, he bowed to her. Deep and formal, the way you bow to someone who saved your life. That became their ritual. Every Thursday, he appeared. Every Thursday, Jessica fed him. They didn't speak much at first, but slowly, in fragments and whispers during her breaks, she learned his story. He'd grown up in Busan, the son of a fisherman who drank away every one they earned. His mother had died when he was 12. Cancer they couldn't afford to treat. At 15, he'd run away to Seoul with nothing but the clothes on his back and a burning conviction that he would never be poor again. He'd done things he wasn't proud of, things he couldn't talk about. But he was trying, he told her, to go legitimate, to build something real. "I'm going to be someone," he said one night, his eyes fierce in the dim restaurant light. "I promise you, Jessica, one day I'm going to be someone who matters." "You already are," she'd replied simply. "You just haven't seen it yet." That was the night everything changed between them. Their courtship happened in stolen moments. Late-night conversations after her shift ended, when Mrs. Park would pretend not to notice them sitting in the closed restaurant, talking until dawn, Dae-Hyun walking her home through Seoul's tangled streets, his presence a shield against the city's darker elements. The night 3 men tried to harass her and Dae-Hyun, this quiet, hungry young man, had moved with such swift, brutal efficiency that they ran. Jessica should have been afraid of what she saw in him that night. Instead, she saw a protector, someone who would burn the world down for the people he loved. She saw potential everyone else missed. When Dae-Hyun told her about his plan to open a small trading company, to leverage contacts he'd made in the underground to move legitimate goods, Jessica didn't hesitate. She'd been saving money, hoarding every tip, every extra shift. She had exactly 15 million won hidden in her tiny room. She gave it all to him. "This is your dream money?" Dae-Hyun had protested, staring at the envelope like it might explode. "You were going to open your own cafe." "Dreams change," Jessica said, taking his hands in hers. "Help me build this one instead." What Dae-Hyun didn't know, what Jessica never told him, was that the trading company's early success wasn't just his cunning and hard work. It was also the quiet calls Jessica made to her estranged father in California, a businessman with connections throughout Asia. It was the random investors who appeared at exactly the right moments, people who Jessica had carefully cultivated through her father's network. She introduced Dae-Hyun to people who mattered, taught him how to speak to them, how to dress, how to make them see the vision he carried. She translated documents he couldn't read, negotiated terms in English and Japanese that he was still learning. She was the invisible architect of his rise. And she never asked for credit, because she loved him. Not for what he could become, but for who he was on those Thursday nights, hungry, proud, determined, and hers. Minsu entered their lives during the second year of the business. He was Dae-Hyun's first real employee, a street-smart young man with loyalty burned into his bones. From the beginning, Minsu saw what Dae-Hyun couldn't, that Jessica wasn't just a supportive wife. She was the foundation. Hung, Minsu said once, watching Jessica work through financial documents in 3 languages, you know she's the reason half these deals close, right? Dae-Hyun laughed. Jessica? She helps, sure, but this empire, I built this. Minsu had said nothing more, but he'd watched, and he'd remembered. As the years passed and Dae-Hyun's trading company evolved into something darker and more powerful, as money laundering mixed with legitimate business, as political connections deepened, as the boy from Busan became a name whispered in fear and respect, Jessica stayed beside him. She helped him become the man he wanted to be. She just never realized that man would forget the woman who made him possible. Jessica had started planning their 7th anniversary dinner 3 weeks in advance. She'd always been meticulous. It was one of the things Dae-Hyun used to love about her, back when he noticed the small things, back when he noticed her at all. She'd called the Italian wine merchant in Gangnam twice to confirm the 1995 Barolo would arrive on time. Dae-Hyun had mentioned it once, years ago, after closing a major deal. This, he'd said, swirling the wine in his glass, this is what success tastes like. She'd remembered. She always remembered. The vintage watch had cost her 3 months of the allowance he gave her, money that was technically hers anyway, from dividends on investments he didn't know she'd made. It was a Patek Philippe, the same model his father had pawned when Dae-Hyun was 10 years old to pay for alcohol. She'd had it engraved on the back. Time brought you to me. Love keeps you here. The menu had taken days to perfect. Galbi marinated exactly the way his mother used to make it, using the recipe she'd whispered to Jessica during her final hospital visit. Kimchi jjigae with the right level of heat. Japchae with the glass noodles cooked to that precise texture, between soft and chewy. Every dish was a memory, a promise, a prayer that maybe this year would be different. By 6 p.m., everything was perfect. The roses formed a path from the front door to the dining room. Candles flickered in crystal holders. The table gleamed with their finest china, wedding gifts they'd never actually used because Dae-Hyun was always too busy for formal dinners at home. Jessica had dressed carefully, choosing the blue silk dress he'd bought her in Paris 3 years ago during their last real vacation together. She'd done her makeup the way he used to like, subtle, elegant, nothing that would distract from her eyes. Eyes he used to say he could read like poetry. By 7 p.m., the Galbi was resting, staying warm. She checked her phone. No messages. By 8 p.m., the candles had burned down an inch. She called him. The phone rang 6 times before going to voicemail. His voice, crisp and businesslike. You've reached Kang Dae-Hyun. Leave a message. Hi, she said, keeping her voice light. Just wondering when you'll be home. Dinner's ready. I made your favorites. She paused, hating the hope in her own voice. I love you. By 9 p.m., the food was getting cold. She'd reheated the stew twice. The roses were starting to wilt in the warm apartment. She told herself he was just caught up in a meeting. The Japanese clients had been difficult lately. He'd probably silenced his phone. He'd come through the door any minute, apologetic and stressed, and she'd forgive him the way she always did. By 10 p.m., doubt had settled into her chest like a stone. She called again. No answer. She told herself the phone was dead, that he'd explain everything. By 11 p.m., her hands were shaking as she dialed a 3rd time. This time, someone picked up on the 2nd ring. But it wasn't Dae-Hyun's voice. Hello? A woman. Young, from the sound of her. The kind of voice that belonged to someone who'd never had to fight for anything, who expected the world to arrange itself around her beauty. Jessica's heart stopped. She couldn't breathe, couldn't speak. Hello, the woman said again, slightly impatient now. Then muffled, as if she'd turned away from the phone. Oppa, someone's calling you. Your phone was on the nightstand. A pause, a giggle. He's in the shower. Can I take a message? The line went dead. Jessica didn't scream. That would come later, in private, into a pillow where no one could hear. Right now, she was perfectly, terrifyingly calm. The kind of calm that comes when something inside you breaks so completely that you can actually hear it shatter. She set the phone down gently on the table. She stood up, smoothed her dress, and walked to her study, the one room in their penthouse that was entirely hers, that Dae-Hyun never entered because he had no interest in her hobby of financial analysis and language study. She opened the bottom drawer of her desk. Underneath folders of household documents was a manila envelope. She'd prepared these papers 3 weeks ago, after the last time she'd smelled unfamiliar perfume on his collar. After the night he'd come home at 4 a.m. with no explanation. After she'd stopped being able to pretend that the distance between them was just stress from work. Divorce papers. Meticulously prepared, every clause designed to protect what was hers. She'd hoped she wouldn't need them. Had told herself she was being paranoid, that love meant giving chances, that their history together meant something. But hope, Jessica was learning, was just another word for denial. She carried the papers back to the dining room, looked at the beautiful dinner, the romantic setup, all the effort she'd poured into trying to resurrect something that had been dead for months, maybe years. Then, with the same methodical precision she brought to everything, she began to dismantle it. She swept the candles to the floor. Not violently, just deliberately, watching the wax splatter across the marble. She picked up the wine bottle and poured it across the white tablecloth, watching the red spread like an accusation. She scattered the roses, crushing some beneath her heels as she moved. She knocked over the plates of food, letting them crash and break. Not because she was out of control, but because she wanted him to see, to understand that something beautiful had been destroyed, that she'd done it herself rather than let him do it slowly, invisibly, with neglect and betrayal. When the room looked like the battlefield it felt like, she placed the divorce papers in the center of the table. Next to them, she carefully removed her wedding ring, the diamond catching the light from the overturned candles, and set it down. The engraved watch stayed in its box. She'd return it tomorrow. She pulled out her phone and called for a car service. While she waited, she packed a bag with calm efficiency. Clothes, documents, her laptop, the things that mattered. She didn't cry. Not yet. Tears were for grief, and she wasn't grieving. She was choosing. Choosing herself. Choosing dignity. Choosing to walk away from a man who'd stopped seeing her as anything more than part of the furniture in his increasingly luxurious life. When the car arrived, she took one last look at the penthouse, at the home she'd made, the life she'd built, the future she'd imagined. Then she walked out the door and didn't look back. By the time Dae-Hyun came home, Jessica was 20 kilometers away in a hotel suite, staring at the Seoul skyline and feeling nothing at all. And that nothingness, she knew, was far more dangerous than anger ever could be. Dae-Hyun arrived home at 6:47 a.m., just as dawn was breaking over the Han River. His driver pulled the black Mercedes up to the private entrance of their building, where 2 security guards stood at attention. They bowed deeply, not to him exactly, but to what he represented. Power, danger, the kind of money that made problems disappear. He was whistling as he stepped out of the car, still riding the high of last night's deal closure. The Chinese investors had finally signed 30 billion won in clean revenue, all legitimate, all legal. Well, mostly legal. His phone buzzed with messages, congratulations from his lawyer, updates from Min-soo about morning meetings, a text from Yuna that he deleted without reading. Yuna, the distraction that had turned into a complication. She'd served her purpose, made him feel young again, desired, powerful in ways that had nothing to do with fear or money. But she was getting clingy, talking about leaving her apartment, asking when she could attend his business dinners, as if she could ever fit into his world the way Jessica did. Jessica, he'd forgotten about their anniversary. Again. But she'd understand. She always understood. That was the beauty of Jessica, her infinite patience, her quiet support. She'd probably made dinner, waited up for him, and was now sleeping peacefully upstairs. He'd bring her flowers later, take her shopping, maybe plan a weekend trip to Jeju. She loved Jeju. The guards opened the door to his penthouse. The first thing he noticed was the smell. Wrong. Everything smelled wrong. Not the usual subtle scent of Jessica's jasmine diffusers, but something acrid and stale. Spilled wine, burned out candles, rot. Jessica? He called out, stepping inside. His Italian leather shoes crunched on something. He looked down. Rose petals, crushed and browning, scattered across the marble entryway. His whistling stopped. He walked further in, his heartbeat picking up in a way that had nothing to do with the adrenaline of business deals. The living room was untouched, pristine as always. But as he approached the dining room, the smell grew stronger. Then he saw it. The room looked like a crime scene. Overturned candles leaked wax across the floor. Wine stained the white tablecloth like blood. Broken plates and scattered food created a tableau of deliberate destruction. And in the center of it all, clean and untouched amid the chaos, sat a stack of papers. Daehyun's hands shook as he picked them up. Divorce papers. Official. Legal. Already signed by Jessica. Next to them, catching the early morning light, was her wedding ring. No. The word came out strangled. No, no, no. His phone was in his hand before he'd even decided to call her. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Voicemail. He tried again. Voicemail. Again, again. Jessica, pick up. Whatever this is, we can fix it. Just pick up the goddamn phone. Nothing. Rage flooded through him, hot and righteous. How dare she? After everything he'd given her, the penthouse, the cars, the life of luxury she could never have afforded on her own, how dare she make demands? Threaten him? Did she have any idea who he was now? He was about to hurl his phone across the room when his private entrance opened. Minsu walked in, took one look at the dining room, and went very still. You knew, Dae-Hyun said, his voice dangerous. You knew about this. Minsu met his eyes without flinching. In all their years together, he'd never been afraid of Dae-Hyun. It was why Dae-Hyun trusted him. I knew she was unhappy. I knew you were being an idiot. I didn't know she'd finally had enough. She has no right. Hung. Minsu's voice cut through his rage like ice water. Do you have any idea what you're holding? Divorce papers from my ungrateful, not just divorce papers. Minsu pulled out his phone, tapped a few times, then turned the screen to face Dae-Hyun. I did some digging after she called her lawyer yesterday. Do you remember the early investment agreements you signed? When were you first starting out? Dae-Hyun's jaw clenched. What about them? Jessica owns 40% of your company. The world tilted. That's impossible. I built this company. You built it with her money, her connections, her father's investors. Minsu's voice was gentle now, almost pitying. Hyung, do you remember Park Industries? The silent partner who came through with capital when you needed it most? Of course. They believed in my vision. Jessica's father owns Park Industries. She called in a favor. And the Japanese distributors who gave you your first major contract? Jessica translated every document, negotiated terms you didn't understand because you didn't speak Japanese yet. The German manufacturers? She has a degree in German you never bothered to ask about. Each word was a hammer blow. Every major deal for the first 3 years, Minsu continued, Jessica was in the room, making introductions, translating, smoothing over cultural misunderstandings. You thought they were meeting with you, they were meeting with both of you. And when you formalized the company structure, you were so focused on going legitimate that you never read the fine print in those early agreements. Dae-Hyun sank into a chair, the papers crumpling in his grip. She never said anything. Because she loved you. Because she wanted you to feel like you'd built something yourself. Minsu's voice hardened, and you repaid her by forgetting she existed. His phone buzzed. A text from Yuna. When can I see you again, Oppa? Last night was amazing. Minsu saw it too, shook his head in disgust. Where is she? Dae-Hyun asked quietly. I don't know, but her lawyer called our office an hour ago. Hana Kim, you know her? Dae-Hyun's blood ran cold. Hana Kim was a shark, one of the best divorce attorneys in Seoul, known for destroying wealthy husbands in court. She and Jessica had been friends since university. What did she say? Jessica has been documenting everything for months. Every late night, every unexplained absence, every time you miss an important date. Minsu paused, including last night's anniversary dinner that apparently took her 3 weeks to plan. The watch, the wine, the food his mother used to make, all of it sitting in the ruins of the dining room, a monument to his failure. She's really leaving, Dae-Hyun said, and for the first time his voice cracked. Yes. Over one mistake, one night? Minsu looked at him with something like pity. Hung, it wasn't one night. It was 7 years of you slowly forgetting who made you possible. Last night was just the first time she couldn't pretend anymore. As if on cue, the doorbell rang. Dae-Hyun stood, hope flaring in his chest. Jessica. She'd come back. They could talk about this, but when he opened the door, it wasn't Jessica. It was Yuna, dressed in last night's clothes, carrying an overnight bag and smiling. Surprise! I thought I'd make us breakfast before you had to go to the office. You left so early, She stopped, taking in his expression. What's wrong? Minsu appeared behind Dae-Hyun. You need to leave, now. Excuse me? Who are you two? Leave, Dae-Hyun said, his voice empty. We're done. Yuna's face went through shock, hurt, then calculation. Because of her? Because your wife finally figured out what everyone else already knows? That you outgrew her years ago? The slap came before Dae-Hyun even realized he'd moved. Not hard. He'd never hit a woman, not even in his darkest days, but enough to shock them both. Get out, he whispered. And if I hear you've spoken one word about my wife, I'll make sure you regret it. Yuna fled. Minsu closed the door quietly. That won't fix anything. I know. Dae-Hyun walked back to the dining room, picked up Jessica's ring, and felt its weight in his palm. So small, so light. How had he not noticed when she'd taken it off? How long had she been this unhappy? How long had he been this blind? His phone buzzed again. This time, a formal email from Hana Kim's office, CC'd to his corporate lawyers. The subject line read, Notice of Divorce Proceedings and Asset Division Claim, Kang v. Kang. And attached was a list of Jessica's demands that made his empire look suddenly, terrifyingly fragile. The merger meeting was supposed to be Dae-Hyun's crowning achievement. 18 months of negotiation with Takeda Industries, one of Japan's largest tech conglomerates, all coming down to signatures and champagne. The boardroom on the 43rd floor of his headquarters building was packed with executives, lawyers, and the kind of people whose net worth could destabilize small countries. Dae-Hyun sat at the head of the table in his custom Tom Ford suit, projecting the calm authority that had become his trademark. Across from him, Mr. Takeda and his team waited patiently. The contracts were ready. This deal would expand his empire into markets he'd only dreamed of 7 years ago. Then the door opened. Jessica walked in like she owned the place. Because, as it turned out, she partially did. She wore a charcoal gray suit that Dae-Hyun had never seen before. Armani, perfectly tailored, the kind of outfit that meant business. Her hair was pulled back in a sleek bun. Diamond studs in her ears, not the ones he'd given her, something new. Behind her walked Hana Kim, Jessica's lawyer, carrying a leather briefcase and wearing a smile that made Dae-Hyun's blood run cold. The room fell silent. Gentlemen, Jessica said, her voice clear and professional. I apologize for the interruption. My name is Jessica Kang, and I'm exercising my rights as a major shareholder of this company to attend this meeting. Mr. Takeda looked confused. One of the board members, old Mr. Cho, stood up sputtering. Mrs. Kang, this is highly irregular. You can't just... Actually, I can. Hana placed a document on the table. My client owns 40% of Kang Industries, as outlined in the original incorporation agreements from 7 years ago. She has every legal right to be present for major decisions, including this merger. Dae-Hyun's hands clenched under the table. Jessica, this isn't the time or place. She looked at him directly for the first time in 2 weeks. Her eyes were clear, cold, utterly without the warmth he'd taken for granted. On the contrary, husband, this is exactly the time and place. She moved to the presentation screen, and suddenly documents appeared. Scanned agreements, financial records, correspondence. Dae-Hyun's own history laid bare. I want to clarify something for our potential partners at Takeda Industries, Jessica continued, addressing Mr. Takeda directly in flawless Japanese. When you're entering into this merger, you should know the full history of who you're partnering with. Mr. Takeda's eyebrows rose. He responded in Japanese, Please, enlighten us. The silent investors who provided initial capital for Kang Industries? Jessica switched back to Korean for the board's benefit, her voice steady as a surgeon's hand. Park Industries, owned by my father, James Park, of Park Holdings in California. He invested because I asked him to. The favorable loan terms from Hana Bank, arranged through my university roommate whose father sat on their board. The Japanese distribution deal that gave this company its first major international foothold? She looked at Dae-Hyun. I negotiated that, in Japanese, because my husband didn't speak the language well enough to understand that the initial terms would have bankrupted him within 2 years. One of the younger board members whispered to another. Dae-Hyun could feel his carefully constructed image cracking. The German manufacturers, Jessica continued, pulling up more documents. I have a degree in German literature from Seoul National University. I translated every technical specification, every contract, the luxury penthouse where my husband currently resides, purchased with my inheritance from my grandmother. I gifted it to him on our first anniversary. The room was utterly silent now. Even Mr. Takeda looked fascinated, his business acumen clearly recognizing a power play when he saw one. I'm not saying my husband didn't work hard, Jessica said, and for the first time, a hint of emotion crept into her voice. He did. He had vision and drive and the kind of determination that could move mountains. But he didn't move them alone. Dae-Hyun stood up, his chair scraping loudly. Everyone out now. Mr. Kang, Mr. Takeda said mildly, I believe Mrs. Kang has the floor. This is a private matter. This is a business matter, Jessica corrected. And I'm here in a business capacity, but I'm finished making my point. She nodded to Mr. Takeda. I have no objection to the merger. In fact, I think it's strategically sound. I just wanted to ensure our partners knew the full picture. She gathered her documents. I'll be in the building for the next hour if anyone has questions. Good day, gentlemen. She walked toward the door, and Dae-Hyun moved to intercept her. We need to talk. Now. Hana stepped between them smoothly. My client has said everything she needs to say publicly. If you want to speak privately, we can arrange that. Privately? Yes. Dae-Hyun was barely holding on to his composure. My office. 10 minutes. Jessica nodded once and left. The meeting dissolved into chaos. Mr. Takeda requested a recess. Board members huddled in corners, whispering urgently. Minsu appeared at Dae-Hyun's elbow. This is bad, Hung? I know. No, you don't. Half the board is texting their lawyers right now. If Jessica decides to fight for control, she won't. Are you sure? Because the woman who just walked in here isn't Jessica, who used to wait for you for dinner. Dae-Hyun didn't answer. He was already heading to his office. Jessica was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows when he entered, looking out at the Seoul skyline. Her reflection in the glass was composed, untouchable. Hana stood near the door, a silent guardian. Leave us, Dae-Hyun said. I'm not going anywhere, Hana replied coolly. It's fine, Hana. Jessica didn't turn around. Wait outside, please. Hana hesitated, then nodded and left, closing the door behind her. The silence stretched like broken glass. What do you want? Dae-Hyun finally asked. Money? Fine, I'll double whatever you asked for. The penthouse? It's yours. Just don't destroy what we built. What we built. Jessica turned to face him, and he was struck by how different she looked. Not just the clothes or the hair. Something fundamental had changed in her eyes. You're finally saying we. Jessica, I made a mistake. One stupid mistake with a woman who means nothing. It wasn't one mistake, Dae-Hyun. Her voice was eerily calm. It was 7 years of mistakes, of forgetting, of taking for granted. The affair was just the moment I stopped being able to pretend. Come home. We can fix this. Counseling, whatever you want. I'm not angry, she interrupted, and somehow that was worse than if she'd screamed. I'm done. There's a difference. He moved toward her, desperation making him reckless. Jessica, please. I love you. Do you? She tilted her head, studying him like a stranger. Or do you love what I did for you? What I made possible? Because, Dae-Hyun, I don't think you've actually seen me in years. That's not true. What's my favorite color? He blinked. Blue. You wore that blue dress? That was your favorite color for me. Mine is green. Like the garden at Halmioni's restaurant where we used to talk. She smiled sadly. When's my birthday? October the 23rd, 27th. Close, though. She pulled out her phone, showed him the screen. I have 3 job offers, Samsung, LG, and a venture capital firm in Singapore. All 3 are offering positions that would make me your competitor. His world tilted again. You wouldn't. Why not? You taught me well. I helped build this empire. I can build my own. Jessica, his voice cracked. Please, I'll do anything. For a moment, just a moment, he saw the old Jessica. The one who used to look at him like he hung the stars. The one who believed in him when no one else did. Then her expression shuddered. You became everything you wanted to be, Dae-Hyun. You're powerful, fierce, respected, rich beyond your wildest dreams. She picked up her bag, but you forgot who helped you become it. And that's not a mistake you make with someone you love. That's a choice you make when you've stopped seeing them as a person. She headed for the door. What do you want from me? He shouted. What will it take? She paused, hand on the doorknob. Nothing. That's what you don't understand. I don't want anything from you anymore. I want everything for myself, and I'm going to take it. I'll fight you. No, you won't. She looked back at him, and her smile was almost pitiful. Because if you fight me, I'll show the world exactly how much of your empire was built on my back. And you care too much about your image to let that happen. She was right. They both knew it. Sign the papers, Dae-Hyun. Give me what I'm owed. And maybe someday, you'll find someone who can love the man you've become. She opened the door. I only love the man you used to be, and he died a long time ago. The door closed softly behind her. Dae-Hyun stood alone in his empire, surrounded by everything he'd gained and nothing he needed. And for the first time since he was a hungry boy in Halmyoni's restaurant, he let himself break. 3 months felt like 3 years. The divorce proceedings had gone public despite everyone's best efforts. In Seoul's elite circles, secrets lasted about as long as morning dew. First, it was whispers at country clubs, then blind items in gossip columns, then a full expose in a business magazine. The woman behind the empire, Jessica Kang's hidden role in building Kang Industries. The article was devastating. Not because it was cruel, it was meticulously factual. Interviews with early business partners who remembered Jessica at every crucial meeting. Financial records showing her family's investments. Testimonials from translators and consultants who'd worked with her. Even Mr. Takeda gave a quote. In my 30 years of business, I've rarely met someone as strategically brilliant as Mrs. Kang. Her husband was fortunate to have such a partner. The word was felt like a knife. Dae-Hyun's reputation took the hit he'd feared. Not catastrophic. He was still powerful, still feared, still wealthy. But the shine was gone. Investors started asking uncomfortable questions. If Jessica Kang was so integral, what else don't we know about? 3 board members quietly resigned. The merger with Takeda went through, but at less favorable terms than originally negotiated. For the first time in 7 years, Kang Dae-Hyun felt vulnerable. He'd tried everything to reach Jessica in those first weeks. Flowers delivered to her office, returned. Letters handwritten in the middle of sleepless nights, unanswered. He'd even shown up at her new apartment building once, only to be politely but firmly removed by security. She'd left instructions. He wasn't welcome. The penthouse felt like a mausoleum. He'd tried to repair the dining room, but the stains wouldn't come out of the marble. Eventually, he'd had the whole room sealed off. He couldn't bear to look at it. He was drinking too much. Scotch, mostly. The expensive kind that was supposed to taste like success, but now just tasted like failure. Sleep came in fragments, haunted by memories of Jessica's face that last day in his office, that terrible calm, that finality. Minsu watched him spiral with increasing concern. You need to eat something, Hyung. I'm fine. You've lost 10 pounds. You're not fine. Dae-Hyun poured another drink. Did you know? All those years, did you know how much she did? Yes. Why didn't you tell me? Minsu's laugh was bitter. I did. Multiple times. You didn't want to hear it. It didn't fit the story you were telling yourself, the self-made man who conquered the world through sheer will. He paused. You needed to believe you did it alone. So you convinced yourself she was just supporting. Background noise. The truth hurt worse than the scotch burned. Yuna had tried to come back, of course. She'd appeared at his office 6 weeks after Jessica left, dressed provocatively, talking about being there for him during this difficult time. The transparent opportunism had turned his stomach. Get out, he'd said quietly. Baby, don't be like that. We can be together now. No more hiding. You were never anything but a distraction from how empty I felt, and you knew it. We both knew it. She'd left in tears, but they were calculated tears. She'd probably already moved on to her next target. Someone else's husband, someone else's life to temporarily inhabit. The worst part was the silence from Jessica. Not angry calls or bitter messages. Just nothing. Like he'd ceased to exist in her world. Like 7 years of marriage had evaporated. Until the gala. It was a charity event for children's hospitals, one of those mandatory society functions where Seoul's elite gathered to write checks and be seen. Dae-Hyun had considered not attending, but absence would have shown weakness. So he'd put on his armor, the Brioni suit, the Patek Philippe watch, the mask of confidence, and gone. He saw her immediately. Jessica stood across the ballroom in an emerald green gown that took his breath away. Her hair was down, falling in soft waves over her shoulders. She was laughing at something. Her whole face lit up with genuine joy he hadn't seen in years. Then he saw who she was talking to. The man was around Dae-Hyun's age. maybe slightly younger. Tall, handsome in a quiet way, wearing a well-cut but not ostentatious suit. He was looking at Jessica like she was the only person in the room. Actually listening when she spoke, his attention completely focused on her. When she gestured while talking, he watched her hands. When she laughed, he smiled like her happiness was his happiness. Minsu appeared at Daehyun's elbow. That's Choi Min-jae, investment banker. Worked his way up from nothing, scholarship kid who made good. Word is he's brilliant, ethical, and genuinely nice, a rare combination in our world. How long? Daehyun's voice was hoarse. They met at a conference 6 weeks ago. It's not serious yet, but it could be. Daehyun watched as Min-jae pulled out Jessica's chair at their table. Such a small gesture. The kind of thing Daehyun used to do back when he still saw her as someone to care for, rather than someone who would always be there. Throughout dinner, he couldn't stop watching. The way Min-jae listened to her, laughed at her jokes, touched her hand gently when making a point, the way Jessica leaned toward him, engaged and present in a way she hadn't been with Daehyun in years. She looked happy, not the practiced smile she'd worn at his business dinners, playing the perfect wife. Real happiness. The kind that came from being seen, valued, chosen. The kind of happiness Daehyun had stopped giving her somewhere along the way. He'd had too much to drink when he approached their table during the cocktail hour. Min-jae saw him first, his expression politely neutral. Jessica looked up, and for a second, something flickered in her eyes. Not love, not even anger. Just a flash of what might have been sadness before her professional mask settled into place. Mr. Kang, she said formally. Nice to see you. Mr. Kang, not Daehyun. Not even my husband, though they weren't technically divorced yet. Jessica, I was hoping we could talk. This isn't the time or place. Her voice was kind but firm, the same tone she might use with a business acquaintance who'd overstepped. Please, just 5 minutes. Min-jae stood smoothly, his hand resting lightly on the small of Jessica's back. Protective, but not possessive. The lady said no. Please respect that. Daehyun's fists clenched. Every instinct screamed at him to assert dominance, to remind this man who he was dealing with. But then he saw Jessica's face. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't impressed. She was just done with this version of him. I'm sorry, Daehyun said quietly, surprising himself. I'll leave you alone. He walked away, feeling every eye in the ballroom on him. The powerful Kang Dae-Hyun, retreating from a woman and a man who didn't fear him. The drive home was a blur. Somewhere between the gala and his penthouse, the dam broke. He pulled over on a quiet street and let himself feel it all. The loss, the regret, the crushing weight of understanding exactly what he destroyed. He thought power would fill the emptiness inside him. But the power was cold. Power didn't wait for you for dinner. Power didn't believe in you when you had nothing. Power didn't translate documents at 3 a.m. or make introductions that changed your life. Jessica had done all that, and he'd repaid her by forgetting she existed. His phone rang. His lawyer. Mr. Kang, I have Mrs. Kang's updated settlement proposal. I think you should see this before we respond. What is she asking for? A pause. Less than she's entitled to, actually. She's being remarkably fair, almost generous. Send it to me. When the email came through, Daehyun read through the terms with growing realization. Jessica wasn't trying to destroy him. She was trying to move on. Clean break, fair division. No demands for ongoing support beyond what she'd actually earned. She was letting him go. He called his lawyer back. Give her everything she's asking for, and add the property in Jeju, and increase the settlement by 20%. Sir, that's not necessary. Do it. She deserves it. She deserves more, but I know she won't take more. After he hung up, Daehyun sat in his car until dawn, watching Seoul wake up around him. And somewhere in that long night, something shifted. Not acceptance, not yet, but the beginning of understanding. He'd lost Jessica, but maybe, if he finally learned the lesson she'd tried to teach him, he could stop losing himself. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, Kang Dae-Hyun sat in a therapist's office for the first time in his life. Dr. Yoon was a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and an unshakable calm that reminded him painfully of Jessica. Min-soo had found her, a psychologist specializing in trauma and what she called power corruption syndrome. Dae-Hyun had resisted for weeks. I don't need therapy. I need my wife back. Then go to therapy, Min-soo had replied. Because the man you are now, he's the reason she left. So here he sat, in a comfortable chair that felt like an interrogation seat, trying to explain 7 years of failure to a stranger. Tell me about the first time you felt powerful, Dr. Yoon said. Dae-Hyun thought back. When I closed my first major deal, 10 million won. It felt like I could finally breathe. And when did you stop needing Jessica? I never stopped. When did you stop showing her you needed her? Dr. Yoon corrected gently. The question landed like a punch. Dae-Hyun was quiet for a long moment. When I started believing I'd done it all myself. When the money got big enough that I forgot what it felt like to be hungry. Power is seductive, Dr. Yoon said, because it fills the hole where self-worth should be. But it's a poor substitute, and it's expensive. It cost me everything. No, it cost you Jessica. You still have everything else. The question is, what are you going to do with it? Over the following months, Dae-Hyun began dismantling the parts of his empire built on shadows. He sold off 3 businesses that operated in gray areas, legal, technically, but morally questionable. He started refusing deals that required intimidation or exploitation. His profits dropped 15%. He slept better than he had in years. Min-soo watched the transformation with cautious optimism. The board thinks you're losing your edge. Maybe I am. Or maybe I'm finding something I lost. Jessica won't come back, Hung. You know that, right? I know. And he did. The acceptance hurt, but it was clean pain. Honest pain. This isn't about getting her back. It's about becoming someone who deserved her in the first place. Meanwhile, across the city, Jessica was building her own empire. Her division at Zenith Capital had exceeded every projection. She'd brought in 12 major clients in 6 months, mostly women entrepreneurs who'd been overlooked by traditional finance. Her approach was different from Dae-Hyun's, collaborative rather than dominating, strategic rather than aggressive. It worked. You're making us look good, her boss said during her 6-month review. I'm promoting you to senior partner, youngest in company history. But the real achievement, Jessica knew, wasn't the title. It was the fact that when she looked in the mirror, she recognized herself again, and there was Min Jae. Their relationship developed like spring, slowly, gently, inevitably. He'd asked her to dinner after that first charity gala, and she'd said yes, partly because he seemed nice, and partly because she needed to prove to herself she could move forward. She hadn't expected to actually fall for him. Min Jae was nothing like Dae-Hyun. Where Dae-Hyun had been fired in ambition, Min Jae was steady warmth. He didn't need to be the most powerful man in the room. He listened more than he spoke. He remembered the small things, that she took her coffee with honey, not sugar, that she loved old bookstores, that she got quiet when she was overwhelmed and needed space, not solutions. You're different from other women I've dated, Min Jae said once during a walk along the Han River. How so? You know exactly who you are. It's attractive and a little intimidating. Jessica laughed. I didn't always. I had to lose myself completely to figure out who I was. Was he really that bad? Your ex-husband? No, Jessica said honestly. He was that lost, and I was that invisible. Bad combination. 3 months into their relationship, Min Jae still hadn't pressured her for anything. No demands to meet his family, no questions about when she'd be ready for more. Just consistent, patient presence. You're choosing me every day, Jessica realized aloud one evening. Min Jae looked confused. Of course I am. Isn't that what you're supposed to do? And Jessica understood, finally, what she'd been missing. Dae-Hyun had chosen her once, on their wedding day, then assumed that choice was permanent. Min Jae chose her every morning when he texted good morning. Every evening when he asked about her day and actually listened. Every moment he made space for who she was, not who he needed her to be. Back in his penthouse, Dae-Hyun was writing a letter. He'd written dozens to Jessica over the months, but this was the first one he'd actually send. Jessica, I'm not writing to ask for another chance. I don't deserve one, and I think we both know that. I'm writing because I need you to know that I finally understand. You weren't background in my life. You were the foundation. Every success I claimed as mine alone was built on your sacrifice, your connections, your brilliance. I was so obsessed with proving I'd escaped poverty that I convinced myself I'd done it through pure will. I erased you from the story because acknowledging you felt like admitting I was still that hungry boy who needed help. But that boy was better than the man I became. He knew how to be grateful. He knew how to see the people who saved him. I'm trying to be him again. Not for you. I know I lost that right. For myself. Because the man I turned into isn't someone I'm proud of. I've transferred the Jeju property to your name and the apartment building in Gangnam. They should have been yours from the beginning. This isn't a gesture or a bargaining chip. It's what's right. I hope whoever you're with now knows what he has. I hope he never takes a single day with you for granted. I hope he chooses you every morning and thanks whatever God he believes in that you chose him back. You saved me twice, once when you fed me and once when you left me. Thank you for both. Dae-Hyun Jessica's response came 3 days later, a single line that made him cry for the first time since his mother's funeral. Thank you for finally seeing me. It wasn't forgiveness, exactly, but it was an acknowledgement. It was enough. Minsu found Dae-Hyun in his office late that night, staring at Jessica's message. You know she's seeing someone. I know. You're really okay with that? Dae-Hyun was quiet for a moment. I loved her, Minsu, but I loved power more. I thought if I became powerful enough, the love would be automatic, that she'd stay because of what I could provide, not who I was. He looked at his friend. Now I have all the power I wanted, and I finally understand it was never a substitute for actually being worthy of love. That's growth, Young. It's too late for growth, but it's still growing. The next week, Dae-Hyun announced the Jessica Kang Foundation for Women Entrepreneurs. 50 million won in initial funding, grants and mentorship for women starting businesses. No strings, no equity stakes, no control, just support. When reporters asked why he'd named it after his ex-wife, Dae-Hyun was honest for the first time in years. Because she built an empire and let someone else take credit, this is me finally giving credit where it's due, and hopefully helping other women avoid being erased the way I erased her. The interview went viral, not because it was scandalous, but because it was genuine. People weren't used to seeing powerful men admit fault. Jessica saw it. She didn't call or reach out, but she shared the foundation's information on her social media with a simple caption, "Important work, worth supporting." It was more than Dae-Hyun deserved. It was grace. And grace, he was learning, was what Jessica had always offered him. He'd just been too blind to see it. 1 year and 3 days after Jessica signed the divorce papers, Min Jae proposed. They were at a small Italian restaurant in Itaewon. Not fancy, just warm and intimate. He didn't get down on one knee or make a production of it. He simply took her hand across the table and said, I want to choose you every day for the rest of my life. Will you let me? The ring was beautiful, a sapphire, because he'd listened when she mentioned she'd always preferred them to diamonds. Not huge or ostentatious, just perfect. Jessica said yes with tears in her eyes. But that night, lying in bed, she found herself thinking about Dae-Hyun. Not with longing or regret, but with a strange, bittersweet gratitude. He'd broken her heart, yes. But in the breaking, she'd found herself. She'd learned her worth. She discovered she could be whole alone, which meant she was choosing Min Jae from wholeness, not from need. You okay? Min Jae asked, pulling her close. Yeah, Jessica said, and meant it. Just thinking about how far I've come. We've come, he corrected gently. No, I came. You just met me at the destination and decided to stay. He kissed her forehead. Best decision I ever made. 2 weeks later, Jessica's lawyer called about final documents for the last property she and Dae-Hyun had co-owned, a small commercial building they'd bought as an investment early in their marriage. It needed both signatures to complete the sale. Can we do it at my office? Jessica asked. Actually, the buyer requested we meet at the property location. Something about verifying conditions before final signing. It's a restaurant space, apparently. Jessica agreed, not thinking much of it until she pulled up to the address and her heart stopped. Homioni's Kitchen. The little restaurant where she'd first met Dae-Hyun was closing down. Mrs. Park had finally retired, and they were selling the building. Jessica hadn't even known Dae-Hyun had bought it years ago. She sat in her car for a moment, steadying herself. Then she saw him. Dae-Hyun pulled up in a much more modest car than he used to drive. Still nice, but not the aggressive luxury of before. He got out, saw her, and stopped. They stared at each other across the parking lot. He looked different. Older, yes. There was gray at his temples now, but also lighter somehow, like he'd put down a weight he'd been carrying. He wore a simple suit, no flashy watch, no power accessories. She looked radiant. That's what he thought. Happy in a way that came from the inside out. They walked to the restaurant entrance at the same time, and the awkwardness of the moment broke into simultaneous nervous laughter. I didn't know you'd be here, Jessica said. Neither did I. The lawyer just said to meet at the property. Hana, Jessica said. Minsu, Dae-Hyun replied. They both shook their heads. Their well-meaning friends had orchestrated this. We don't have to do this if you're uncomfortable, Dae-Hyun offered. No, it's okay. Actually, maybe it's fitting. This is where it started. They went inside. The restaurant was empty, closed for business, but still smelled faintly of the soybean paste stew that had always simmered on the stove. Their corner booth was still there. Without discussing it, they both sat down, the same seats they'd occupied a decade ago. The silence wasn't hostile, just heavy with history. You look good, Dae-Hyun said finally. Happy. I am. You look different. I'm trying to be. He paused. I heard about your engagement. Congratulations. Jessica glanced at her sapphire ring. Thank you. Sapphire, he noticed. He listens. He does. More silence. Then Dae-Hyun spoke, his voice raw with honesty. I killed the best thing in my life because I thought power would fill the emptiness inside me. It never did. It just made the emptiness echo louder. Jessica looked at him carefully. This wasn't the man who'd forgotten their anniversary. This was someone who'd done the hard work of looking at himself. I learned I could be whole without you, she said quietly. That was the hardest and best lesson of my life. He smiled sadly. I'm glad you learned it. I'm sorry I had to be the villain in that lesson. You weren't a villain, Dae-Hyun. You were just lost. We both were, in different ways. She noticed then a chip hanging from a chain around his neck, visible where his collar was open. What's that? He touched it self-consciously. 1 year sober. Not from alcohol exactly. From control. From needing to dominate everything and everyone. Dr. Yoon calls it power addiction. I call it the thing that made me forget what actually mattered. Jessica's eyes softened. You're doing the work. Too late, but yeah, I'm doing the work. It's not too late. It's just too late for us. That's different. He met her eyes. Tell me about him, Min-jae. Why? Because I want to know that you're getting everything you deserve. So she told him about Min-jae's gentleness, his consistency, the way he made space for her ambitions without feeling threatened, the way he chose her every single day. He sounds like me, Dae-Hyun said quietly, the me I was supposed to be. Maybe. Or maybe he's just himself, and that's exactly what I needed. Does he know? Dae-Hyun asked. How extraordinary are you? He reminds me every day. Good. Dae-Hyun pulled out a pen and the property documents. I hope he never forgets the way I did. I hope he wakes up every morning grateful that you chose him. I hope he never takes a single day for granted. They signed the papers in silence, their hands almost touching across the same table where she'd once slid him a plate of free food. The foundation, Jessica said as they finished, the one you named after me. It's doing good work. You've been following it? I donated it, anonymously. Dae-Hyun's eyes widened. Why? Because it's the right thing to do, and because I want to believe people can change. Have I? Changed? Jessica considered. You're changing. That's enough. They stood to leave, and at the door they paused. I'm sorry, Dae-Hyun said, for all of it, for not seeing you, for not choosing you every day, for becoming someone you had to escape from. I forgive you, Jessica said, and realized she meant it. Not because you deserve it, but because I deserve peace. I hope you get everything you want, Jessica. Everything I was too broken to give you. I already have, she said simply. They walked out into the Seoul afternoon, and at the parking lot, they went to their separate cars. No hug, no dramatic goodbye, just a nod of mutual respect. As Jessica drove away, she looked in the rearview mirror once. Dae-Hyun was standing by his car, watching her leave. Not with longing or regret, just with acceptance. She didn't look back again. 6 months later, on a perfect spring afternoon, Jessica married Min-jae in a garden ceremony overlooking the Han River. There were only 40 guests, family, close friends, colleagues who'd become genuine companions. The contrast to her first wedding was stark. That had been at the Grand Hyatt with 300 guests, half of whom were business contacts she'd never spoken to before. Ice sculptures, a 12-tier cake, designer everything. Beautiful and hollow. This wedding was held at a small boutique venue with cherry blossoms drifting on the breeze, simple white chairs, wildflowers in mason jars. Jessica wore a tea-length dress she'd chosen herself, not because it photographed well, but because she felt like herself in it. Min Jae cried when he saw her walking down the aisle, not the manufactured emotion of a performance, but real tears of gratitude. "You're sure?" he whispered when she reached him. "Every day," she whispered back. "I choose you every day." The ceremony was short, personal, filled with laughter and genuine emotion. When they kissed, their friends cheered not out of obligation but out of joy for two people who'd found each other. At the reception, as Jessica was greeting guests, Hannah handed her a package. "This came this morning. From him." Jessica knew immediately who him was. Her hands trembled slightly as she unwrapped it. Inside was a painting, beautiful, detailed, clearly expensive. It showed Halmioni's kitchen at night, warm light spilling from the windows, a young woman visible through the glass sliding a plate toward someone in the corner booth. The note was simple. "Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible. I'm sorry I became blind when I could finally see. May you always be as happy as you deserve to be." Jessica's eyes filled with tears. Not regret, she had none of that, but closure. The final chapter of a story that had shaped her, broken her, and ultimately made her stronger. Minjae appeared at her side, saw the painting, read the note over her shoulder. "You okay?" he asked gently. "Yeah." Jessica wiped her eyes, just grateful for all of it, even the painful parts. They led me here. Minjae took her hand, squeezed it. "Do you want to display it?" "Maybe, somewhere quiet. It's part of my story, but not my present." He kissed her temple. "I love that you have room in your heart for complicated feelings. It's one of my favorite things about you." That was the difference, Jessica realized. Dae-Hyun needed her to be simple, uncomplicated, and always supportive. Min-jae loved her complexity, her depth, her entirety. Their honeymoon was everything Jessica had dreamed of. They went to Greece, the islands she'd always wanted to visit but never had time for, because Dae-Hyun's business always came first. Min-jae watched sunsets with her, explored ancient ruins, and listened to her theories about history and art. They talked for hours and were comfortable in silence. It was ordinary and extraordinary all at once. Meanwhile, in Seoul, Dae-Hyun was building a different kind of life. He was dating someone, Dr. Lim, a literature professor at Yonsei University. She was 43 his age, with a sharp mind and no tolerance for his occasional lapses into old patterns. When he got too focused on work, she called him out. When he tried to solve her problems instead of listening, she gently redirected him. "I don't need you to fix things," she said once. "I need you to be present." It was exactly what Jessica used to say. This time, he heard it. His business was smaller now, more focused. He divested from anything ethically questionable, taken a profit hit, and discovered he didn't miss it. The respect he earned now came from integrity, not fear. It felt better. But his real passion had become the foundation. He personally mentored 12 young entrepreneurs, all from backgrounds like his, all struggling to believe they deserved success. He met with each one monthly, shared his mistakes openly, taught them what he wished someone had taught him, that character matters more than conquest. 1 year after Jessica's wedding, on what would have been their 9th anniversary, Dae-Hyun returned to Halmioni's kitchen. The new owner, Mrs. Park's nephew, had kept the name and the menu. The corner booth was still there. Dae-Hyun sat down, and the nephew recognized him immediately. "Mr. Kang, my aunt told me stories about you and your wife, how you used to sit right here." "Ex-wife," Dae-Hyun corrected gently. "And yes, this booth changed my life." He ordered bibimbap, the same dish Jessica used to give him for free. When it arrived, he ate slowly, remembering the hunger that used to consume him. Not just for food, but for validation, for worth, for proof that he mattered. He understood now that he'd been looking in the wrong places. Success without character was just noise. Power without compassion was just tyranny. And love without presence was just a contract. He'd learned all of this too late to save his marriage, but not too late to save himself. As he was paying, the door opened. Jessica and Min-jae walked in, laughing about something, his arm around her waist. They all froze. Then, slowly, Jessica smiled. Not the polite smile of strangers, but the acknowledgement of shared history. She walked over. Dae-Hyun, Jessica, Min-jae. He stood, shook Min-jae's hand. First anniversary? You remembered, Jessica said, surprised. I remember everything now. A little late, but better than never. There was no pain in the moment, no longing or regret, just three people who'd all found their way to peace through different paths. The painting, Jessica said. Thank you, it's beautiful. You were beautiful. They are beautiful. I just couldn't see it when it mattered. Min-jae, secure in himself and his relationship, stepped away to give them a moment of privacy. You're happy, Dae-Hyun observed. It wasn't a question. I am. You? Getting there. Finally learning what that means. Jessica touched his arm briefly. Good. You deserve that too. So do you. And I'm glad you found it. They stood there for a moment. Two people who'd loved each other, destroyed each other, and survived to find themselves on the other side. Then Jessica took Min-jae's hand and walked toward their table. She didn't look back. Dae-Hyun watched them go, and for the first time in years, he felt genuine peace. Not because he'd gotten what he wanted, but because he'd finally learned what actually mattered. Love wasn't about possession. It was about appreciation. And sometimes the greatest love was letting go. He left the restaurant, leaving behind ghosts and regrets, carrying forward only the lessons. The story ended not with reunion, but with resolution. Not with passion, but with peace. And that, they all learned, was sometimes the truest happy ending of all. Checkmate.